Hi there, Patrick Peace here, working on chapter 10 of Richard Dawkins' book by the title The Selfish Gene. And in this chapter, it's called You Scratch My Back, I'll Ride Yours. The reason he calls it that is because he spends this chapter trying to claim that anything altruistic is essentially selfish at its core. And so from the phrase, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, he says instead of that being an altruistic relationship or a symbiotic relationship, he said everything that somebody does is essentially selfish at its core. So if he was trying to do something based on observation or well, he's ethologist. What is it? Study of animals. That his he gets a fail in biology, but definitely a pass in creative writing. So he's a very creative writer. If this was a creative fiction, then it would be, interesting piece of work. But as far as science, no. Science fiction, yes, definitely. And if it was science fiction, it'd be a very dark, dystopian type of, very unfeeling, very uncaring chapter that he's written here, as is all the chapters. He basically makes the argument that anything altruistic can be described as selfish. If, for example, if the way that he uses his reasoning in here, if you were to help somebody, if you saw somebody that was about to be hit by a car crossing the street and you rushed out to help them, that would be seen as a selfish act according to Darwin, because he says the only reason why you would do such a thing is you would have hopes that it would help to propagate your genes. So either he would come up with several theories, as he often says. I could have several reasons why this is possible. One, perhaps you think you might be mating with this person. If it's the same sex, maybe you might think that one of your relatives is going to be related to that person in the future, and they may have children in the future. So you're only saving this person for selfish reasons. And he goes on to give examples of different, let's say if a bird gives a warning call to other birds in the area that a predator is nearby. The bird is only doing that for its own selfish reasons, because in the long run it's better for him to do that for his own benefit, in other words, right? So it's really a sad piece of work, it is. He refers to the Hamilton model. He has this friend Hamilton who he keeps quoting in the book, and it's not surprising that on the back of the book Hamilton gives him a nice little rave review here. He makes an example of the ants that cooperate and how the ants produce offspring, different types of workers and male workers and the queen and all these kind of things. And so he's saying that the ants do things to benefit not themselves but the coming generation of workers, right? All that each one of them cares about is their own genes. Cares in quotes, because he constantly uses his own definitions for words to think that there's no such thing as altruism, that animals. He gives examples of aphids and ants working together to the aphids draw fluid from the plants and then the ants eat it, so the ants take care of the aphids and the aphids help the ants, kind of thing. And he says, he has no idea why the animals, such as complex animals such as these ants or these leafcutter ants he describes in detail, he has no idea how these ever could have evolved. He just thinks they must have evolved that way. So, and as far as the bird helping another bird with giving a call, he says, well, a lot of birds must have died that didn't give the right kind of call over the process of evolution. Do you hear what I'm saying? He said the fact that these animals are able to warn each other of impending danger, it had to have evolved where they were making mistakes and accidentally making noises that were killing themselves. And then over eons it evolved into the correct kind of call to warn. Symbiotic relationships. He has no good argument to fit symbiotic relationships into his selfish gene theory, so he just says they fit in. based on his own definitions. And he makes reference to the New World on page 180. Like, is he writing in the 16 or 1700s? I don't know why you would do that. It just kind of jumped out at me. What other notes did I take? I just read it today, so I want to give my notes while it's still fresh in my mind, because I'm definitely going to forget. Partly because I want to forget, and partly because it's so forgettable. It's really contributes nothing to human understanding at all. I mentioned that he made reference to this aphids and ants working together, and he thinks that maybe this aphid juice, where they draw the sweet juice from the plants, might have been the manna that was described in the Old Testament. Anybody that would read the description of manna in the Old Testament would know that that doesn't sound anything like what the manna as described in the Old Testament. Not even close to it. It's like saying, I found a piece of metal on the ground. Oh, that must have been the sword that David used to slay Goliath or something. Like, it doesn't follow. He simply has a fanciful imagination, that's all. He says we're nothing more than gigantic colonies of symbiotic genes. He describes humans as nothing more than colonies of viruses. And then again, he compares the different trade-offs between suckers and cheats and grudgers, and all within the underlying reasoning that the only purpose for humankind is to propagate the genes. That's it. There is no altruism according to this book. We're just gene propagating machines. Very dark, dystopian, depressing view of humanity, and an incorrect one. But all for the sake of being able to fit it into his simplified theory that we came from primordial soup, and that we just must have accidentally, spontaneously started to replicate, and that become the foundational purpose of all living things, is just this reason to replicate. It's very sad. It's very depressing. I never want to read this book ever again, nor would I recommend it to anybody to ever read it, because it contributes absolutely nothing to a knowledge of ourselves or knowledge of humanity. It's all based on science fiction, speculation, changed definitions, warped to such a degree that good means bad and bad means good, that altruism means selfishness, and selfishness is the be-all and the end-all of his narrow field of view. He gets off on stroking the back. Funny how he talks about no such thing as altruism, but he constantly strokes the ego of his other academics and allows them to stroke him as well. He uses his examples to explain why most of the world is in slavery, and there's this elite group that they're the only ones worthy of propagating their genes, and the rest are just drones that may as well be non-gene carriers at all, and just of no purpose except other than to serve the elites. You can easily draw such doctrine from his ideas, from his views. There's nothing about the mystery of nature, nothing about the spontaneous creation of species and animal activities where they work together. The animals, even the animals that are symbiotic, that eat the food out of the other fish's teeth that he mentions in here, he's unable to explain that. He just says, oh, the fish must be selfish because they know that because they don't eat these animals and they let them eat the food out of their teeth, they're going to benefit in some other way. There's no reasoning for mutual cooperation amongst animals. He just says it's all based on giving them a better selfish reason to propagate their own genes. This is the summation for every argument that, or every insight where he looks at something in nature and makes observations of animal behavior in nature. He relates it back to a selfish reasoning for that particular behavior, no matter what it is. Male-female relations, ant and colony and aphids relations, fish and symbiotic fish relationships, all comes down to the same thing. So he's really looking at something and saying, well, a mother doesn't care for a child out of love or out of altruism. A mother only cares for a child based on some mathematical formula, if he wants to apply values to it, or based on some unconscious reason that it wants to propagate its genes, and that's it. There's nothing about, as I mentioned before, there's nothing about spiritual things. There's nothing about romance. There's nothing about intuitive behavior. There's nothing about cooperative, altruistic, selfless. There's no room for selfless service to one another in such a doctrine as what Dawkins proposes. It's all comes down to selfishness. And if that is the dark view that he proposes, that is a very, very dark way to look at life, a very, very dark way to interpret human behavior, human history. In fact, it's a dark way to interpret the entire history of the human species, but any species. It's a very, very misguided, sad, depressing view of reality, and one that doesn't match with reality. We can go out and we can see that if somebody rescues somebody, they're being selfless. If somebody heroically, if a fireman heroically gives his life up to rescue somebody from a burning building, he's not thinking about future genes, neither in his conscious mind nor in his subconscious mind. He's driven by things like courage, heroism, love, compassion, empathy, all these things that have no place, that have no room in Dawkins' theory whatsoever. They don't fit into his theory. So instead of saying that this person was heroic, he would have to say, oh, what a selfish act they did. They rescued that person from a burning building. What a selfish thing to do. They just wanted to propagate their own species. That's what you would have to conclude if you were to subscribe to the theory that Dawkins puts forward in this book. And he keeps repeating it over and over and over again, even at the very beginning of the chapter. If you look at how he opens the chapter, we have considered parental, sexual, and aggressive interaction between survival machines. Survival machines. He keeps describing humans and animals or any creature as survival machines. He talks about animals in groups and how they don't seem to follow that. They group together. But then he comes up with a new theory to explain that, or his friend does, Hamilton, to explain that as being also selfish or being a advantageous evolutionarily speaking. Everything for him has to be explained by evolution, of course. So that's it. The more I read this book, the more depressing it is, the more I look forward to finishing it so that I never have to look at it again. I feel sorry for anybody that would ever have to study it in an academic setting, except for the purpose of showing how much of a fiction it is, how disconnected from reality it is, and how heartless and cruel it actually is for somebody to subject themselves to think this way, or to suggest anybody else of thinking along the same lines. This is essentially a crime against humanity. This is anti-human. This is humanophobic. It's a misanthropy. The definition of misanthropy, the hatred of humanity. The hatred, and it's also sexist against males. This book is a crime against humanity. It's an insult to humanity. It's not a crime in and of itself, but it would certainly foster crimes against humanity by the type of doctrine that it contains. It is an insult to humanity, and it represents hatred of humanity. At the basest, lowest level, it is an insult to humanity and an insult to every human being with any sense of charity in their heart, with any sense of altruistic motives in their heart. I'm a pretty hard character, I gotta admit. But this, it's a fantasy, it's a fiction. As far as creative writing, it might get a B+. As far as any kind of scientific journal, it should be fail with a capital F, because it's not based on logic. It's illogical, it's presumptuous, and it's pathetic, quite honestly. And it's fucking boring too. Thanks for watching. Take care. God bless you. I love you. If you're in the tortured position of having to study this, endeavor to persevere, my friend.